As the bride's cruel last words echoed in the air, like needles piercing Sujin's pride, the hall fell into a poisoned silence of contempt and superiority. The guests, who until then had been reveling in the young woman's humiliation, turned their gazes to the glasses, the plates, the forced smiles, but they didn't realize that something great was about to happen. The man in the dark suit, who was observing her with unusual seriousness and sensitivity, was not just another influential guest on the list. His name was Seo Jun-hyuk, CEO of one of the largest financial groups in the country, known for his coldness in business, but also for never lowering his head in the face of injustice. And what he had witnessed there, in front of everyone, it was not just a family humiliation. It was an abuse disguised as etiquette, a social wound served as the elite's main course. With a single calculated movement, Jun-hyuk placed his glass on the table and stood up. His steps were firm, unhurried, as if each step on the polished floor of the hall carried with it the tension building in the room. Some guests noticed his movement and stopped talking. Others followed him with their eyes, curious to understand what he would do. Sujin, still trying to stay on her feet, felt the ground disappear beneath her feet as he stopped in front of her. But what no one, absolutely no one, was prepared to see was the next gesture. Without saying a word, Seo Jun-hyuk reached out to the young woman with the sauce-stained apron and unshed tears. And in front of all the elite, their eyes fixed on that moment of utter astonishment, he asked her to dance. And it was there, in that moment that silenced the entire room, that her world began to change, forever. But why did he do it? And what was about to happen after that unexpected and daring act? If you enjoy heart-touching stories and unexpected twists that make your heart race, subscribe to the channel and leave a like so you don't miss any episode. As eyes remained fixed on that humiliated young woman at the lavish wedding, Sujin's mind seemed to want to escape the hall. It was as if every cruel word, every muffled laugh, and every look of contempt pulled her back into her own memories, memories that explained why she was there in that role of servant, even though she was the bride's sister. Sujin was born in Busan, in a small wooden house near the sea, where the salty breeze mingled with the smell of fish from the local markets. She had learned early on that life offered nothing for free. Her father, consumed by gambling debts, had disappeared when she was still a child, and her mother, ashamed, had never heard from her again. All that remained was her grandmother, a woman with calloused hands and a firm heart who shouldered the responsibility of raising her granddaughter with dignity, even without resources. While Ji-yeon, her older sister, had always been the favorite of her wealthy maternal family, receiving gifts, expensive clothes, and later the opportunity to study abroad, Sujin grew up surrounded by limitations. Her life was a series of small sacrifices, getting up early to help her grandmother sell rice balls at the market, studying with borrowed books, and working part-time in cafes to pay her own tuition. Despite all the hardships, Sujin possessed a quiet strength, a determination that made her eyes shine whenever she dreamed of a different future. At school, she was often the butt of jokes because of her simple clothes and worn notebooks. But instead of giving up, she clung to what little she had, believing that education would be her bridge to a better world. She saved every spare coin, dreaming of the day she could get into a good university in Seoul. However, reality always pulled her back. There were bills to pay, a sick grandmother to care for, and the constant feeling that her dreams had to be postponed in the name of survival. It was in this contrast that the distance between the sisters deepened. Ji-yeon, accustomed to parties, designer clothes, and exclusive invitations, began to see Sujin as a burden, an uncomfortable reminder of a background she'd rather erase. To her, her sister wasn't family, but a reminder of the poverty and shame she secretly carried. So when planning her wedding, Ji-yeon didn't hesitate to relegate Sujin to the role of maid, as if to shout to everyone, "She doesn't belong in my world." Even so, Sujin never stopped believing. There was something greater in store for her. On silent nights, after long workdays, she would sit at the narrow window of her Busan room and gaze at the distant lights of the big city. Each flash was, for her, a symbol of hope. The promise that life could be different if she found the courage to move forward. Yet now, in the midst of that luxurious Seoul ballroom, all the memories came rushing back like an overwhelming wave. Every sacrifice, every renunciation, every tear shed in the silence of... The night seemed meaningless in the face of her own sister's cruelty. It was as if all her efforts to remain strong and dignified had been erased by a single sentence spoken in public before people who would never understand her pain. And yet, something inside her refused to completely surrender. Perhaps it was the echo of her grandmother's words, which she always repeated. No matter how many times the world tries to push you down, Sujin, the dignity of someone who is true, cannot be destroyed. These memories were like a stubborn flame, fragile but persistent. Yet as she silently relived her story in that moment of humiliation, she had no idea that someone in the room had already seen beyond appearances. A powerful man, shrouded in mystery, watched every detail, every expression of pain on her face, as if ready to intervene. And what would come next would be capable of turning not only that night of partying, but the entire trajectory of Sujin's life upside down. Amidst muffled laughter and looks filled with contempt, one detail went unnoticed by almost everyone in that luxurious hall. The presence of Kang Min-ho, the enigmatic CEO of the powerful Daehan Group, a special guest of the groom's family. He was seated near the altar, at a table reserved only for Korea's most influential figures, men and women who shaped the country's economy with their silent decisions. Unlike the others, Min-ho seemed uninterested in the banquet, nor in the idle chatter about business and political alliances. His eyes were fixed on a single point, the young woman in a simple uniform who walked between the tables with a tray in her trembling hands. While everyone laughed at her, he observed with an intriguing calm, as if every gesture were worthy of attention. There was something in his posture that escaped the obvious, a serenity that hid a power difficult to ignore. Min-ho was known for his coolness in business, for never letting himself be shaken by crises or competitors, but there was something about that scene that touched a nerve. Maybe it was the way Sujin desperately tried to maintain her composure in the face of humiliation. Maybe it was the way her gaze, even through the suppressed tears, still held a spark of dignity. The fact is, for the first time in a long time, the CEO found himself unable to look away from someone. The murmur in the hall grew louder, and every cruel word hurled at Sujin seemed to echo within him, as if it were a personal affront. And even without anyone noticing, Min-ho had already made a silent decision. He would not allow this injustice to continue, but no one there could have imagined what would happen when this man, known for his influence and the firmness of his choices, finally got up from his chair. The ballroom remained vibrant, soft music echoing through the space, decorated with imported white flowers and tables laden with crystal glasses. For the guests, it was just another sumptuous event, a disdain showcase of power and status. But for Sujin, every second was a silent struggle against the shame that was becoming unbearable. The weight of the tray in her hands seemed to double with each step, and her knees trembled not only from the physical exertion, but also from the emotional burden she carried under so many cruel gazes. As she tried to discreetly cross the room, one of the bridesmaids, with a mocking sneer, deliberately dropped a wineglass on the gleaming floor. The red liquid spread like blood across the pale marble, immediately attracting everyone's attention. With a mischievous smile, she looked at Ji-yeon and said loudly, Looks like someone here forgot to clean properly. Ji-yeon didn't miss the opportunity. Looking directly at her sister, she raised her voice so everyone could hear, "Sujin, clean this up now. Don't let my party turn into a mess because of your incompetence." Sujin's heart raced. The blush on her face burned, but she knelt silently to comply. With trembling hands, she began to wipe up the spilled wine on the cold floor, while cell phone cameras rose to record the scene. They laughed at her, made sarcastic comments, and some even filmed as if it were a sideshow within the lavish wedding. One guest, a businessman known for his arrogant tone, commented loudly, "Tell me, is she a caterer or is she really the bride's sister? If she is, what kind of family flaunts their shame like that?" Laughter erupted like a wave that swept through the entire room. Sujin squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears, but each word came like an arrow. The image of her grandmother repeating that dignity was the only thing no one could take from her came to mind. But at that moment, it seemed impossible to believe. Ji-yeon's silence was even more cruel. She simply watched with a satisfied smile, proud to show the world the superiority she believed she had over her sister. For her, this humiliation was a triumph, a way to erase any shadow that might tarnish her image as the perfect bride. As she cleaned the floor, Sujin's breathing grew heavy. It felt like the entire room was collapsing on her, and each second felt like an eternity. The shame was so great that it seemed impossible to get back up, as if fate had condemned her to always be seen as someone who didn't belong in this world. But among all the gazes surrounding her, there was one that remained fixed, firm, silent, without a trace of mockery. Kang Min-ho's. From the corner of the room, he attentively observed every detail, every gesture of the kneeling young woman. He didn't laugh, didn't comment, didn't hide behind indifference. His eyes were filled with something no one else saw, indignation and compassion. Sujin, however, didn't notice. For her, there was no way out. Standing up, clutching the wine-stained cloth, she wished she could disappear. But at that moment, the sound of a chair being scraped echoed through the hall. A simple sound, but one, that broke the cruel monotony of the scene. All eyes turned to the direction the noise was coming from, and there he was, Kang Min-ho, the most important guest of the evening, the man whose presence everyone revered, was rising from his chair. His face was firm, his posture erect, and his eyes never left Sujin. The hall fell silent, as if every breath had been held in anticipation. No one understood what he would do, but the tension in the air was palpable, and even Ji-yeon lost her smug smile for a moment. And it was then that the unexpected began to unfold. The entire room watched in silence, as if time had stopped. The sound of the scraping chair still echoed in the guests' minds, and their eyes turned to the man who dared interrupt the cruel spectacle of humiliation. Kang Min-ho, the CEO whose influence crossed borders, walked with firm steps towards the young woman who still held the wine-stained cloth in her hands. His every step echoed on the gleaming marble, like a warning that something unusual was about to happen. Conversations ceased, laughter died down, and even the musicians hesitated to continue playing. There was a weight in their approach that everyone felt, though no one dared to comment. Sujin, confused and frightened, kept her gaze lowered, unable to understand why the man was watching her so intently. Her heart was pounding, as if she sensed something impossible was about to happen. When she finally looked up, she found herself staring into a deep, serious gaze filled with authority, but also with something she didn't easily recognize: respect. Then, in a gesture no one would have dared imagine that night, Min-ho reached out to her. His voice, firm and clear, broke the silence of the hall. "May I have this dance?" The words rang out like thunder in the stillness. A shock rippled through the room. The guests' eyes widened in disbelief, and their cell phones were quickly raised to record the moment. It was as if reality had been distorted. The humiliated sister, treated like a servant, was now being asked to dance by the most powerful man in the room. Ji-yeon, the bride, felt her blood run cold. The arrogant smile disappeared from her face, replaced by an expression of concealed fury as whispers began to spread among the tables. "What's going on?" some muttered, unable to believe what they were seeing. Sujin hesitated, paralyzed by fear. Her instincts told her this might only worsen her situation, that perhaps this was another form of mockery. But Min-ho's gaze left no room for doubt. He wasn't smiling, wasn't joking. His expression conveyed sincerity, as if he truly wanted to pull her out of the shadow they'd placed her in. Without realizing it, her trembling hand found his. Feeling his firm, secure grip, a shiver ran through her. Min-ho led her to the center of the hall, under the incredulous gaze of everyone. The musicians, unsure of what to do, slowly resumed their soft melody as the unlikely couple began to dance. The shock was immediate. Every step they took together was like an affront to the established order. The elite, accustomed to demeaning the weakest, now watched helplessly as the roles were completely reversed. Sujin, previously invisible, was the center of attention, not because of her humiliation, but because she was in the arms of a man with enough power to change any destiny. However, no one in that hall yet knew the real reason that had led Min-ho to act that way. As the music filled the room, the contrast between Sujin's delicate hands and Min-ho's firm gesture created a scene no one would have dared imagine just minutes before. With each step of the dance, the young woman felt as if the weight of humiliation began to dissolve, replaced by a new, strange and dangerous sensation: hope. The guests watched in silence, unable to look away. Some whispered about the scandal, others recorded every moment with their cell phones, but everyone knew they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered for a long time. Ji-yeon, paralyzed, forced a fake smile for the photographers, trying to hide the fury burning in her chest. For her, this was more than an insult. It was the destruction of her perfect image among the elite. As he led Sujin elegantly, Min-ho bowed slightly and spoke softly, so only she could hear. "You don't belong where they tried to put you. I want you to work with me." Sujin blinked, confused, nearly stumbling at the revelation. She thought she'd misheard, but his steady, serene gaze confirmed every word. Amid the soft music, she felt the world stop. This wasn't just a gesture of passing compassion. It was a concrete proposal, an open door to a life she'd never dared dream of. "But why?" he murmured, unable to contain his doubt. Min-ho replied without taking his eyes off her, "Because I see in you what they will never see." The words stuck in her mind like a silent promise. For the first time, someone from the outside seemed to recognize her worth, not for her appearance, not for her status, but for the essence she so desperately sought to preserve amid the storms. However, while Sujin's heart began to fill with hope, the hall teemed with tension. Everyone waited anxiously to find out what would happen when the dance ended, and most importantly, how this gesture would impact both of their lives from then on. And what would come after the music would change not only the destiny of that young woman, but also of the man who had decided to defy them all. In the days following the wedding, Sujin's life took an unexpected turn. Kang Min-ho's invitation during the dance wasn't an empty promise, but a firm decision. Shortly thereafter, she received an official call from Daehan Group, summoning her to the company's headquarters in Seoul. At first, she thought it was a cruel prank or a trap set up by Ji-yeon to prolong her humiliation. But when she saw Min-ho's name signed on the hiring document, reality crashed over her like a wave. The most powerful man she had ever known believed she could occupy a place by his side, even if only in the workplace. Arriving at the conglomerate's headquarters was a shock for Sujin. The imposing building stood in the heart of the city, its glass walls reflecting the grey, bustling Seoul sky. Employees in ties came and went with briefcases in hand, and the atmosphere exuded seriousness and rigor. With her new uniform and her badge hanging around her neck, she walked uncertainly through the hallways, feeling that at any moment someone might throw her out for not fitting in. Min-ho, however, seemed determined to show that his choice was no whim. From day one, he made a point of introducing her to the team as someone he trusted, though he didn't explain in detail why he'd hired her. This attitude generated curiosity among her co-workers, some suspicious looks, and even snide comments in the hallways, but it also commanded immediate respect. If she was the CEO's protégé, no one would dare treat her in an openly hostile manner. Little by little, Sujin's routine began to change. Min-ho watched her from afar, noticing the genuine effort she put into learning, from simple tasks to complex reports that required attention and discipline. She arrived early, remained focused even during her breaks, and didn't complain about the difficulties, even though she often had to stay late to get the work done. There was a quiet determination about her that impressed even the most skeptical. On occasion, Min-ho would invite her to lunch in his office. At first, Sujin found it strange to sit across from him at such a sophisticated table, but over time, these encounters became precious moments where they would discuss topics beyond work. He would ask questions about her childhood in Busan, about the grandmother who had raised her with such sacrifice, and listen attentively to every detail, without judgment. She, in turn, discovered that behind the cold and powerful figure of a CEO was a man who also bore the scars of his past, including the loneliness of growing up amid family pressures and impossible expectations. These conversations brought the two closer together almost imperceptibly. A simple gesture, like him discreetly leaving a hot coffee on her desk on the most tiring days, or her preparing a homemade lunch to share with him during a hurried lunch, became a symbol of a connection that grew without the need for explicit words. There was something about the glances they exchanged in the hallways, the way the silence between them was never uncomfortable, that conveyed to the public that their relationship wasn't limited to an employment contract. Sujin, though surprised by this closeness, still harbored a deep insecurity. She felt constantly out of place, as if she were living a dream that could end at any moment. Sometimes, when she looked at Min-ho, she wondered what he really saw in her, since she lacked the extravagant beauty of elite women, nor the brilliant resume that impressed at corporate meetings. But when she found a serene, steady glow in his eyes, she felt that perhaps she was seen in a way she never had before, as someone who truly mattered. However, the world around them wasn't silent in the face of this approach. Murmurs were already circulating in the company's corridors and even among Seoul's elite social circles. The press was beginning to speculate. Social media was abuzz with malicious comments, and there were those who saw Sujin's presence not just as an anomaly, but as a threat to Min-ho's impeccable image. And while the two were building a silent bond without realizing it, external forces were already moving to destroy what was growing between them, preparing an attack that would test not only Sujin's courage, but also Min-ho's determination to protect her. The complicit silence surrounding Sujin and Min-ho within the company was soon broken. With each passing day, new rumors spread through the corridors of the Daehan group. Vicious comments surfaced in meeting rooms, informal coffee chats, and even in private groups on corporate social media. Some said Sujin was only there because of Min-ho's pity party. Others claimed she was an opportunist trying to climb the social ladder through a hidden relationship with the CEO. No matter how hard she tried to ignore it, each word hit her like an invisible needle, eroding her confidence. Things got worse when the press started sniffing out the story. A short video of the wedding dance had leaked onto social media and quickly went viral. In it, it was clear to see Min-ho extending his hand to Sujin and leading her to the center of the hall. To anonymous internet users, the scene looked like something out of a romance drama, but to Seoul's elite, it was a scandal. Comments multiplied on news portals. Who is the poor girl who charmed the CEO? Has Min-ho lost his mind? Or she must only be after the money? When the story hit the gossip pages, the pressure mounted even more. Sujin, who had never sought notoriety, was suddenly exposed in headlines describing her as the mysterious maid who hooked the Daehan Group heir. Old photographs were scoured on forgotten social media, intimate details of her life in Busan were revealed, and even old neighbors appeared for interviews, often misrepresenting facts just to gain attention. Min-ho's family didn't remain silent. Gathered at a private dinner, close relatives vehemently expressed their disapproval. His uncle, who was in charge of one of the company's divisions, said coldly, "This involvement could tarnish decades of reputation. We cannot allow such a fragile bond to destroy what we have built." Min-ho's mother, always strict, reinforced, "She doesn't belong in our world. She's just a passing distraction. If she continues, she'll be ruined." These words, though harsh, did not shake his resolve. But what really inflamed the situation was the sudden appearance of Choi Hye-rin, his ex-fiancée. The daughter of an influential banking tycoon, Hye-rin was known not only for her beauty, but also for her cunning ability to manipulate situations to her advantage. Her engagement to Min-ho had been broken off months earlier for reasons never publicly revealed, but many still believed the two would eventually reunite. Hye-rin appeared at a public event, smiling, and when questioned by journalists about Min-ho's supposed new relationship, she responded with irony, "I'm sure his heart will always be rational. He knows how to distinguish true love from fleeting illusions." The strategically calculated remark was enough to further fuel speculation. The press interpreted it as a clear dig at Sujin, and headlines soon emerged with cruel comparisons between the perfect former bride and the girl of humble origins. Within the company, pressure reached its peak. Employees were torn between curiosity and prejudice, and Sujin became the target of even more hostile looks. On one of her most difficult days, while walking through the lobby with some documents, she heard two colleagues chuckling behind her. Does she really believe she can become the wife of a man like him? If you believe it, you are even more naive than you seem. Those words echoed in her mind for the rest of the day, bringing back the old insecurity that she didn't belong in this world. Although Min-ho did his best to protect her, even with discreet gestures of support, Sujin felt suffocated. It was as if each step forward was accompanied by an even larger shadow trying to pull her back. Things reached a boiling point when, at a social gathering, Ji-yeon, the sister who had never accepted her presence, decided to confront her in front of everyone. Dressed in a luxurious outfit, she approached Sujin with a venomous smile and whispered loudly enough for everyone present to hear, "You may even wear new clothes, but you're still the same street girl you've always been." The impact of the sentence was devastating. Sujin tried to remain firm, but her heart broke at her sister's cruelty, and it was in that moment that she understood a painful truth. Even though Min-ho was by her side, the war against the elite and against the rejection of her own family was perhaps greater than she could bear alone. But what no one imagined was that the decision she would make next would completely change the course of this story. The following days were a silent storm within Sujin. Every cruel comment, every sidelong glance in the company hallways, and every sensationalist news item that appeared on the gossip portals was like a stone being deposited on her already weary heart. No matter how hard she tried to hold her head high, she felt herself becoming increasingly suffocated, as if the weight of the entire world were being placed on her fragile shoulders. Min-ho remained by her side, steadfast, trying to shield her from attacks, protecting her in meetings, and confronting journalists with cutting responses. However, the more he defended her, the more the feeling grew that she was the root of the problem, the weak link that could compromise his reputation and, consequently, the stability of the company he led. On lonely nights, Sujin would sit by the window of her small room in Seoul and gaze at the distant city lights. Each flash seemed to question whether she truly had the strength to carry on, whether it was worth fighting against an entire system that rejected her simply for existing in a space not meant for her. Her sister's words at the event echoed in her mind like a curse. "You're still the same street girl you always were." It was in this turmoil of emotions that she made a painful decision. If she truly loved Min-ho, she couldn't allow him to be destroyed because of her. Love, for her, had always meant sacrifice, and now she realized that perhaps the greatest sacrifice was giving up the only person who had ever made her feel valued. One silent dawn, she picked up a worn notebook and wrote a letter, tears smearing the ink. Her words were a plea for forgiveness, a confession of love, and, at the same time, a goodbye. She thanked him for every gesture, every look, and for showing her that there were still people capable of seeing beyond appearances. But she said that, for her own dignity and for his future, she had to disappear. The next morning, he left his company, a badge and the letter on the table in his small office. He grabbed a suitcase with a few clothes and set off for Busan, his hometown, where he believed he could hide from the weight of rejection. Her days in Busan were once again simple. Sujin returned to humble work at local markets, selling handmade sweets and helping out in small cafes. Despite her attempts to rebuild a routine, there was a void in her eyes that betrayed the absence of something that had already become an essential part of her life. Even though she was surrounded by familiar faces, she felt more alone than ever. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Min-ho searched for answers. Finding the letter on the table was like being stabbed in the chest. He read and reread those lines countless times, unable to accept her decision. He knew Sujin had left to protect him, but deep down he understood he couldn't let that be the end. And even without revealing his plans yet, he had already made a decision that would surprise not only Sujin, but also everyone who doubted his determination. The days in Busan dragged on slowly, as if time had decided to punish Sujin with a routine of silence and solitude. In the city's small market, among stalls selling fruit, fresh fish and traditional sweets, she had set up a simple table with cardboard boxes where she sold rice balls, made with her grandmother's old recipe. The sweet, comforting aroma attracted customers, but even as she smiled politely at each of them, her soul remained distant. The void left by Min-ho was a weight that no sale could alleviate. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Min-ho's heart burned with unease. Since finding the letter, he hadn't had a peaceful night's sleep. He felt her absence in every detail, from the silent corridors of the company to the coffee he used to leave on her desk on cold mornings. Sujin's decision might have been motivated by love, but for him there was no true love in abandonment. Determined, he mobilized his trusted team to track down any clue that might lead him to her, ignoring the family's protests and the vitriolic comments from the press. Weeks later, he finally discovered her whereabouts. On that cloudy Busan morning, the market was bustling with people buying ingredients for lunch. Amid the shouts of vendors and the sound of the sea in the background, Sujin was setting up her small stall when she heard growing murmurs among the customers. A black luxury car had pulled up at the market entrance, completely out of place in the simple, popular setting. Men in suits made way, but it was the figure emerging from the vehicle that made everyone's hearts race. Kang Min-ho, the CEO who graced magazine covers, was there, walking purposefully toward the young sweets vendor. The buzz spread like wildfire. People began recording the scene with their cell phones, curious to know what a man of his stature was doing in such an ordinary market. Sujin, recognizing him, felt her legs weaken. He tried to retreat, hiding behind the stall, but it was too late. Min-ho's eyes met hers, and with every step he took there was a mixture of pain, determination, and unbridled love. Without hesitation he stopped in front of her. Silence fell over the market, broken only by the distant sound of waves lapping against the pier. Sujin tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. Before she could react, Min-ho did the unthinkable. He knelt before her, amidst the dust and the astonished gaze of dozens of people. Han Soo-jin, her voice rang out firmly despite the emotion that choked her. You can try to run away from me. You can believe you're protecting me by walking away, but none of that matters. Before everyone here, before the entire world, I declare, you are the woman I have chosen. A collective gasp ran through the crowd. Some applauded spontaneously, others recorded the moment in tears, and many were shocked by the unprecedented scene. The most powerful man in the boardroom was now kneeling in Busan's popular market, not to close a deal, but to confess his love for a woman everyone deemed unworthy. Sujin felt her heart pound against her chest. The tears she'd been trying to hold back streamed freely down her face. She knelt before him, unable to bear the enormity of his gesture. "Why would you do that for me, Min-ho?" he asked softly, almost whispering. He took her hands, lifting them firmly. "Because from the first moment I saw you, I knew your dignity shone brighter than any jewel. These people display, and I will not allow fear to separate us." The words echoed like a promise, etching themselves not only in her heart, but also in the videos already spreading across the internet in real time. Min-ho's public act transformed Sujin's story into something impossible to erase. What had once been a source of ridicule now became a symbol of courage and true love. Even so, amidst the clamor and tears, a shadow of uncertainty still hung over them. After all, the gesture had been grand, but the world around them remained filled with enemies willing to sabotage this union. And the question that remained was inevitable. Would their love withstand the consequences of this daring act? News of Kang Min-ho's gesture in Busan spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media was awash with videos and comments, transforming the popular fair into one of the most talked about scenes in the country. For many, it was the kind of romance only seen in television dramas. For others, it was a scandal that could shatter the image of one of Korea's most influential businessmen. But regardless of opinion, no one could deny that the courageous act marked a turning point in both their lives. Back in Seoul, Sujin and Min-ho faced the inevitable. His family's reaction. Gathered in a luxurious room, their closest relatives made no secret of their discontent. The uncle once again emphasized the risks to the company's reputation, and Min-ho's mother, her expression cold, declared that she would not accept the union. However, Min-ho, more determined than ever, responded calmly but unwaveringly. "I don't need your approval to love. But if you want the continuation of everything we've built, you'll have to learn to respect my decision." The silence that followed was heavy. No one dared directly challenge this man who, in a single choice, had shown himself to have more power than any tradition or social expectation. Sujin, at his side, remained silent, but in her heart, she felt stronger than ever. For the first time, she was not alone in her struggle. Days later, in a symbolic gesture, Min-ho took her to a private dinner at one of the city's most elegant venues. There were no photographers, no audience, just the two of them facing a panoramic view of illuminated Seoul. It was there that instead of a traditional ring, he placed a small red ribbon on her hand, a symbol of an eternal bond according to ancient traditions. "It's not about luxury, Sujin," he said. "It's about destiny." She smiled through her tears, understanding that this gesture held more truth than any jewelry could offer. The dinner wasn't just a celebration. It was a declaration that, despite the battles fought, love had endured. However, even with the weight of reconciliation and victory over so many obstacles, one detail still remained: how to transform that story of pain and resistance into a message capable of inspiring not only the two of them, but everyone who in some way followed in their journey. And this answer would come in the last chapter, in a scene that would forever seal the meaning of the love that was born in the midst of humiliation. Months later, Sujin's life had completely transformed. She was no longer the young woman who carried trays in silence, trying to hide from cruel eyes, but a woman who had learned to walk alongside someone who believed in her dignity above any wealth. With Min-ho, she had built not only a new life, but also a new meaning for love. A love that had survived the scorn, rejection, and barriers imposed by a society that so often proved unjust. On a sunny morning in Busan, she walked along the seafront with a girl of about 7, the daughter of a neighbor who asked her for help while she worked. The little girl held her hand trustingly, and Sujin, with a sweet smile, taught her a simple lesson: that she should never be ashamed of who she was, that true beauty lay not in luxurious clothes or dazzling parties, but in the courage to remain true to herself, even when the world tried to stifle her voice. The wind carried the salty scent of the sea, and the waves crashing against the rocks seemed to mark the rhythm of a story that, though it had begun in humiliation, was now finding its redemption. Sujin looked at the horizon, remembering all the times she'd dreamed of a different future. Now she understood that it wasn't fate that suddenly changed, but the strength to believe in herself, and above all, the courage to accept love when it finally presented itself. Min-ho, from afar, watched her tenderly, and in that moment it became clear to anyone who witnessed the scene: true luxury was not in the shine of diamonds or the power of a famous surname, but in the simple act of choosing someone by heart and not by appearances. And so, amidst the sound of the waves and the innocent laughter of the child, Sujin and Min-ho's story ended not as an unattainable fairy tale, but as a living reminder that even the most wounded hearts can find healing in true love. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, share this video with someone who needs to believe in love, and subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories that will certainly move you even more.